Welcome to the Edged Rebs podcast. I'm Jenni Field.
I'm Advita Patel.
And I'm Trudy Lewis.
So in this episode, I want us to talk about confidence because it's one of those topics that always comes up in our coaching retreats. When we ask our coachees what is one of their key objectives, they always say they want to build more confidence, they want to feel bolder about some of the goals that they have, and they feel that sometimes that can stop them progressing. As a confidence coach, I talk about, obviously, confidence a lot, and it was actually one of our very early episodes on imposter syndrome, which was has been one of our biggest downloads actually. And since that first episode, we have done a few more in various other seasons, and they've always been quite popular. And you would have seen in one of the last seasons, I have changed my mind a lot around imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is something that I have understood now that it isn't actually a fair reflection on the research that was done in the 70s on how we feel about ourselves. And what imposter syndrome often means is that we feel like we're frauds, we feel like we don't belong, we feel like we shouldn't get the job and one day we're going to be found out. And we shared in one of the last seasons an article by Ruchika Tulshyan and Jodie Ann Briley, who wrote for the Harvard Business Review about how to stop telling women that they've got imposter syndrome. And we'll share all those past episodes in our show notes if you're interested. But in this episode, I want us to kind of dig a bit deeper in confidence specifically, how we each of us build our own confidence in the work that we do and how we manage that, because confidence isn't something that you can just wake up one day and go, oh, I'm going to be really confident today. And I'm also not the biggest fan of fake it till you make it. I don't believe in it. I think you're just masking your own insecurities, your self-limiting beliefs, and you really have to channel why you feel the way you feel. And I want to just do a couple of definitions first, because we often mistake and overlap certain terminologies when we're talking about our confidence. And there's two key definitions I want to talk about. So what is confidence and what's self-esteem? Because each one is quite different. So confidence is when you have little doubt about yourself and your abilities. So that means that you know that you're confident in your work, you know you're going to deliver great work, you're aware of where you may need some growth. And the other part of confidence is that you've got a feeling of trust in somebody else that they're going to do their job well as well. So you've got confidence in them. Self-esteem is when you have high self-esteem, that's when you value your sense of worth. And it can be considered as a measure of how you value and approve of yourself and how much you appreciate yourself. So what you might find is that, say, as an example, a celebrity, for example, can go out on stage and sing in front of thousands of people and be really confident about their ability to sing. But what you might read in the papers and news is that they are self-harming or they are abusing themselves. And what that normally means is that they've got really self-esteem. And we do things like various activities in our coaching retreat to understand where your gaps are in your self-esteem scale, the Rosenberg scale, but also in terms of, is it confidence or is it self-esteem? And both need to be managed well in terms of what you do, because if your confidence in your abilities isn't there, then your self-esteem will be knocked. And if your confidence in your abilities is there, your self-esteem may still be lower depending on what's going on in your environment. So I want us in this session to kind of talk about self-esteem specifically, to be honest, because I do think that is often what a light bulb moment for many of our attendees that come along to our retreat in terms of, actually, I am really competent and confident in my work. I know I'm good at what I do. I've done my education, my experience. Where the gap is that my self-esteem is quite low. And our friend Brené talks about we often self-sabotage ourselves when we have self-esteem. So we may overeat, we may not exercise, we may not look after ourselves, we may burn out quite a lot. We don't understand boundaries very well. So I want to throw it out to Jenni and Trudy. And I won't pick on one of you, whoever wants to interject.
That was very kind. I thought so.
Whoever wants to interject. In terms of where self-esteem, and I mean, first of all, before we spoke about this and before I've spoken to you about this, were you aware the differences between the confidence and the self-esteem kind of definitions?
No, I wasn't until we did probably the first coaching retreat where you started to really break down the definitions, where you were starting to research and read and learn more about confidence. I think I think we've all been on that journey together as we are one. So as you've read more, as is always the way, we share as we learn, regularly. And I think, when we did the first imposter syndrome one, we all felt quite similarly about it. Then you were the one that came forward and said, look, I've read more about this. This is what it is. And then, the gap between confidence and self-esteem certainly wasn't something I've considered. And I so enjoy that distinction for me and for others, because I think it's a real revelation about how we just think confidence is all of those things together. We think, oh, they're really confident.
Yeah.
And what that means and how that makes us feel about that person without considering the self-esteem element. So I find it fascinating and interesting and all things. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. And the really interesting thing about that is that we can make really poor judgments on somebody based on their character. So if you have somebody who's quite outspoken or confident in how they approach and how they see themselves, and in meetings like, oh, they've got it together, we can make an assumption that they don't need that support or they don't need the help because they're fine. But what you might find is that the self-esteem might not be there. So they don't take feedback very well. So one of the symptoms is that when you say to somebody, oh, you did some really good work, rather than just going, oh, thanks, I appreciate that, they'll go, no, I didn't. There was like 1,500 other people involved. And that only took me 1 minute, when we know it's taken them like 3 months to get to do that work. So that is a sign of like, how much are you appreciating and valuing yourself? Trudy.
Yeah. I kind of knew the difference. But yes, like Jenni, I found, all of the times that you've shared it and explained the explanations around it, I think that's really useful to learn the difference between the two, because I would have probably initially just clumped them all together in confidence at some point. But I do think it's an incredibly important thing to have a distinction about, because a lot of people say things like, I'm not good enough. And that speaks to their self-esteem. I'm not good enough. And it's an interesting thing, because in coaching, it's also quite challenging to break that down because you have to delve back into the person's past a little bit, because there's only, it's only when you start to delve, dig deeper and say, well, what happened? At what point did you start to feel less than for you to be at this stage right now? And, it's that kind of, it's quite a deep one to go into, simply because for so many people, they don't even remember some people. And it's only when you start to go there that they begin to think, actually somebody said this when I was a child, or this happened. And as a result, I had a lack of self-esteem and so on. But then if you were to clump them all together, they would never see that.
No.
The breakthrough from actually coming out of self-esteem is quite powerful, and it makes such a massive difference to how people or an individual just deals with their life. So I think it's really an important distinction, as well as it being an interesting one.
Yeah.
And I think it's incredibly useful that sometimes, as we coach at the coaching retreat, we address some of this as well, because, there are different people, everybody's coming from a different angle. So it's looking at what their take on it, because, one's person, I'm not good enough, is different from another person's I'm not good enough.
And that's the thing about confidence. What you may see as, this is what I should be. It's very different. It's quite subjective. For some people, it's I want to stand in front of 20,000 people and speak on stage. And that's what confidence means to me. And for others is I want to be able to articulate my thoughts with clarity in a meeting and not feel the fear.
Yeah.
And both are equally important. And I think that's imperative and critical for those who are trying to understand what confidence means to them, to understand that, because we've spoken about comparison quite a lot in this season and in previous seasons. And just because you see somebody doing something doesn't mean that you need to be doing that if you don't want to do that. And we seem to have this kind of this followership thing going on that we think we need to do it to be successful, and that's not quite true. The other thing about self-esteem is that you need an element of vulnerability as well, and vulnerable confidence, which is, I know it kind of goes against each other a little bit, but you do need to have a little bit of vulnerability in terms of understanding what you need to say to others to help you grow in your confidence and self-esteem. And it's not hiding things away. So if you need clarity and you need support, then to help boost your self-esteem, then it's okay for you to say, do you know what, this isn't quite okay for me, and I need X, Y, and Z from you to help me. And there's nothing wrong with that. But people fear again, and it's once again, it's peppered with this whole imposter syndrome that people talk about. And even though it's now recognised that it's not a syndrome and it's not something that we should pay too much attention to on an individual basis, it's something about the environment. People still talk about it. Mm-hmm. So people will still say to me, oh, I feel like a fraud. I feel like I don't belong in this space and I don't think I should be here. I don't know why I've been given that opportunity. And in the work that I do with the Leader Like Me, with the underrepresented women of colour, they're specifically, did I get that job because I'm a woman of colour? Or did I get that job because I'm qualified and experienced? And it's because of their lived experience and the behaviours that they have had from others has made them feel that way. So it's really important around your vulnerability around self-esteem and confidence as well. And it takes time. And that's the other thing I want to just kind of mention as well. So I did kind of just briefly before talk about the Rosenberg scale, because it is a framework that you can use, and we'll share it in our show notes if anyone is interested in knowing more about that. But what I would say, and for me personally, it'd be really good to get both your views. Self-esteem goes up and down for me, and it's 100% dependent on my environment and what is happening around me at that time. So if I've had somebody's made a comment on social about something that I've done and have been a bit, passive aggressive, which often happens on social, I will be quite bold and be like, no, this is what we're doing, this is what we should be doing. But then I will have a bit of like, I don't know if am I right person? So, my kind of confidence around and self-esteem around that dips, not for long, because I've got techniques and tips now to get me out of that, but it can really impact me. And what I've realised with my self-esteem is highly dependent on environments and other people, not necessarily me. And that's something it took me a long time to figure out. So I'm very protective of my environment and my boundaries. And again, I'm referring back to Brené's quote, if you're not in the arena, getting your butt kicked with me, then I'm not really interested in what you have to say, which I know is a very privileged position to take because I work for myself. When you work in an organisation and you've got leaders, how do you manage that? Like, how do you protect your kind of yourself in some of the feedback you might get? Because I speak to leaders and say, well, we need to help them improve and get better. But I suppose it's dependent on how you do that, right? And because you have to be very wary of the feedback you're getting, which can knock you. So how do you manage that? Jenni?
Oh, God,
that's a big question.
I know. I was thinking exactly the same thing and thinking, I hope she doesn't ask me.
Yeah, thanks. So, I'm scribbling as you've been talking about the sort of the distinction between the two, and I keep coming back to this: self-esteem is the value of your sense of worth. It's the measure of how you appreciate yourself. And I think your question then was kind of how do you manage that if you take the view that your sense of worth is coming from someone else.
Yeah.
But I would throw that back to you to say...
That boomerang effect.
Isn't it? Yeah. So it was interesting when you were saying your self-esteem is impacted by other people, whereas I feel like your self-esteem is yours and therefore shouldn't be impacted by other people if it's down to how I value myself.
Yeah.
So if I think about my own experience, I would say I have medium self-esteem and high confidence. And I say medium self-esteem because I've had to work on various things throughout my life around, people, relationships and things, which I've shared a few in this season. So that's where the self-esteem isn't always as high as I'd like it to be. But I'm very good at knowing my worth and knowing that. The environment has no bearing on that for me at all in terms of my self-esteem, because it's mine and I own that and I'm responsible for that. And that's about me making sure that if I'm starting to wobble about, my value or my worth, then that's about having, a grown-up conversation about that. So even if I'm trying to think of a situation which isn't work-related, but it's maybe sort of being at home and thinking, I'm going to ask my husband if he'll do dinner tonight. That for me is quite a big thing to ask, which links to previous things in my past. Whereas I know, because my husband said to me, just ask, can you do dinner? Yeah, sure. Like it's absolutely no problem at all. And that's a little bit linked to that self-esteem of having that courage to sort of say that and do that. But that's not down to anybody other than me having to get control of myself and going, just ask.
Yeah, but the reason you feel the way you feel is because of your past lived experiences.
It is, but
that somebody else made you feel the way you feel.
They did.
Which is a trigger.
It is. But it's not, my self-esteem doesn't go up and down based on the environment that I'm in. There are things that might have situations I might be in where I have to draw on my past experiences and my learnings with which to behave in a way to help me get through that. But it's not like my self-esteem has been knocked because of something that's happened to me, because I feel like I know what my worth is. I know that I'm important. I know that I have to look after myself first. I've got all of those things that I don't know what would happen in my environment to knock that. Whereas I can see what would happen in my environment that would knock my confidence. I suppose is what I'm as I'm sort of reflecting on.
Fair. See, I am very, very confident in my abilities.
very, 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 very confident.
And the reason I am confident in my abilities is because I've done the work. So I've got my qualifications, I've got my experience. I work hard at what I do, so I know my abilities and the work that I do. Because of my credibility, I know that. So my confidence doesn't really shake in my ability to do work. Where my confidence shakes is when somebody will question me as an individual, which is what I mean about environment. So if I'm a bit bolshy on Twitter, which I often am, it can happen, and somebody makes a passive comment, not about my work, but about what I've said around, I don't know, representation out in a conference, it will shake me a little bit because I'm like, who am I to say that? So my value can be, and I think mine is definitely because of behaviours I've experienced from others.
And that shake for you is a shake on your own value contributing to that conversation, which is what's the shake of the self-esteem rather than the confidence.
Yes.
Oh, this is so educational.
Ooh.
I know, I'm just fascinated just sitting here listening.
It's very deep.
It is deep.
It feels like I've got my own personal podcast.
But this is why I want...
Please step in, Trudy.
Yeah, please do, Trudy. But this is why I wanted us to talk about it, because we talk about it at such a peripheral level of confidence. And we kind of go, well, I'll just get confidence tomorrow by reading a few books and maybe, watching a TED Talk. It doesn't work that way. It is so much more and deeper than that. And I don't think you should be so hard on yourself if you don't fix it in 24 hours.
Yeah.
It's much more than that. What about you, Trude? And it's deep, I know.
Help me.
It's my internal voice crying out. It's interesting what you say about, what causes you to have low self-esteem or have challenges with your self-esteem. And I was thinking about it and reflecting while you were both talking. So for me, I don't know that external things do disturb my self-esteem very much. I'm probably leaning towards what Jenni was saying, where a lot of it is internalized. So I have spent a lot of time, I'm a thinker, I spend a lot of time self-analyzing and self-reflecting. So as a result, I will have a lot of kind of views on my worth about any given thing. So I would say it does go up and down dependent on my own internal factors, not necessarily the environment that I'm in. So I am confident in who I am. Like you, I've worked hard. I'm educated. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not afraid of talking to, to more senior people or anything, because sometimes that plays into it and people say, oh, I don't have the confidence to step out there. And I'm thinking, well, I don't really have those issues. Mm-hmm. My self-esteem can sometimes be knocked because I overthink it. So I overthink my worth. I overthink who I am and oh my goodness, I'm not good enough to be in that particular sphere at that particular time. Or that I might feel a little bit out of my depth because I'm talking in an environment that's a little bit beyond me when you think about where I consider myself to be. And again, that's self-perception. It's not necessarily somebody saying to me, oh, Trudy, you shouldn't be here.
But that is your environment contributing to how you feel.
In a very subtle way, but not from an external kind of something.
Nothing's been done to you.
Yeah.
But the environment that you're in could make you question.
Absolutely. And I think that will happen for anybody. But the thing with what was said to you when you were younger that caused you to have low self-esteem, for instance, or that might contribute to low self-esteem or low confidence, are things that you've internalized, and then how you've processed them internally sometimes, that then obviously the external triggers get you into this state of saying, I'm behaving this way, or I'm behaving like my self-esteem is low. And then sometimes not even recognizing why you're behaving that way, because you haven't connected the dots between, this was said to me a long time ago, I have low self-esteem. And then there's a level of shame that is attached to some of this, to say, I can't even say anything about this because, everybody else around me seems so confident, so kind of clear about themselves. If I were to be vulnerable and open my mouth, I would look so much lesser, and that would contribute to my feeling of low self-esteem. So I will go even lower. And so I think it's a good one to delve deeper in, but there's so much more to it than just, like you said, we just read a book. I'm just going to listen to Mel Robbins, and I'm all fired up.
I'm going to high-five myself in the mirror, and I am ready to go.
It's not that. It can't be that, because if you think about how confidence and self-esteem work together, you've got this resistance almost of saying, I've got Mel Robbins speaking in my head, but I've got this massive giant beside me telling me that I am not good enough and I can't do this. And the trick, or the need, is to find ways, like you said, Advita, find techniques that for you each time can walk you out of those problems.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it'll be useful for those who are listening to talk about what are the symptoms of low self-esteem and what does that look like, not only for our own kind of thing, but also for them to kind of see, actually, is this what I have? And obviously there's various frameworks and tools I spoke about. So one of the signs could be, so you're confident, like I said, in the work that you do, but you struggle to speak up. So everyone in the room is kind of like chit-chatting about an idea or a thought, and it's a rubbish idea and it's not great. But there's something in you that's stopping you going, actually, everyone, this isn't a great idea. So that's one of the, and I think we've all experienced that at some point. I know I did in my very early career. Definitely has helped with my work that I've done on my values and the work I've done on my purpose to make sure that I now speak up. And fairness is one of my big values, if people weren't aware. I think it's tattooed on me somewhere.
I think it is.
It's a bit
if it's not, let's do that.
It's a little signpost, a bit bigger than a tattoo, actually.
Definitely. So what's one of your kind of signs that that your self-esteem isn't quite there, Jenni?
I don't know. I feel like I've got quite...
She's perfect, man.
Well,
I'm only joking.
I genuinely don't feel like I have particularly low self-esteem. I don't. When you said about the struggling to speak up, there are certain environments, to contradict myself, where I wouldn't speak up because I wouldn't feel that I would be valued in that environment to do that. That's less so now. I mean, I don't think I feel like that. I've felt like that for about sort of 6 years. But I would say going back sort of 6-7 years ago, there are definitely things where I didn't speak up, where I kind of should have done. And that has, if you look at where I was 7 years ago and where I am now, you can, even photographs. We were doing this the other day, weren't we? Let's look at photographs of us 7 years ago and photographs of us now, and you can really see that difference. So I think there is something, but I'm trying to think of what a symptom would be if I was, and I'm really struggling. So I'm going to see if Trudy's got anything.
Well, I think the only symptom for me would probably be withdrawal. Yeah. So, but then I'd caveat that with the fact that if I am in an environment where I need to speak up, even feeling low self-esteem, I will probably say something. So if I'm in a meeting, for instance, and I know that I need to say something, I'm most likely to push past any feelings of low self-esteem. And maybe that's the confidence coming in and stepping in and saying, do something. But it would be withdrawal more than anything else, because it's withdrawal in that I will step away because there is something probably because I do internalize things a lot, because I think a lot. I talk to myself a lot. I've got many things going on in my head. Like cats up there. But that self-talk is what then actually helps me through this, because the self-talk helps me to determine what is fact and fiction and what is fiction.
Okay.
So what's real and what's not real. And so sometimes I challenge myself in the moment that I might feel very low self-esteem. I might be like, yeah, but that's not true, is it? And the minute I do that, it shifts how I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's something about context. So as I'm struggling to think of moments where I had low self-esteem, I'm thinking about different friendship groups, different situations I've been in, and I'm really anchoring on your point of not sort of speaking up. And I think there are certain friendships groups that I might be in where I won't contribute as much as others, but I have then intentionally removed myself from those friendship groups. So that's why I think I can say I don't really have many of those moments, because I've sort of pruned my life to remove myself and others from those moments. So I don't ever put myself in situations where I have that feeling of I haven't got any value to add here. I think over the years I've just changed my situation and walked away from people or distanced myself from them so that I don't have that feeling and experience anymore. Yeah. And that's difficult, quite a lot of the time, but I think that's definitely something that I have intentionally done, and I've intentionally done over the course of about 6 years.
Yeah. So before we move into tips, I want to share a couple of symptoms that you may experience yourself, just so you're aware. So one of them is not rewarding yourself. So feeling like you don't deserve a reward.
I don't ever do that. Oh my God, this is like therapy.
So you're feeling like you don't deserve reward, you don't deserve treat. You are very kind of hard on yourself, like I need to be better, so you don't reward yourself. The other one is, and this is coming from a recovering people pleaser, but the keenness to please others. So we are eager to please and we overthink why somebody may not like us and why, what's happening there. We feel very self-conscious about ourselves. So this is work that I've done on myself for a long time, especially because I realised that my consciousness about who I was and what I did stopped me speaking on podcast and speaking on stage because I was really self-conscious. So that's something to really think about. You avoid challenges because you want to be perfect. So you won't take risks. You won't step into an uncomfortable situation because you don't want anyone to see gaps in your kind of perfection that you created for yourself. You apologise a lot. And I know there's lots of people who do this. So
I apologise a lot, but it doesn't mean, it depends.
It does, Trudy. It does.
It does. It's a fact.
It's a fact. No, but it is a symptom of self-esteem where you apologise a lot. You feel like you have to apologise a lot for things. You criticise yourself a lot. So you'll say things like, I don't look great today. I could be better today. We're not very good at supporting who we are and stuff. We blame ourselves. So if something has gone wrong and we it's not our fault, we'll take the blame. Now, there's a difference between being a leader and leading and taking the kind of fall for the team and leading effectively. That's very different to saying, it's all my fault, I should have been better, I'm so sorry, I'm rubbish. It all kind of falls into that. And then the feeling of unable to assert ourselves. So, like I said before, when we're speaking in a room, we feel like we're not heard. Even though we've got the qualifications and the credibility, like I say, we're very confident in who we are, in our abilities, we just can't assert ourselves in the right way and we struggle to articulate that. So those are some of the signs. And I think I definitely recognise myself in some of those, and I've been in those positions where I have done that. And like I said before, it is because of the environment. Somebody's made a comment about myself, or I remember when I first started Comms Rebel, I got trolled. That was fun.
What an experience.
What an experience that was. And I was using an online scheduling tool to book my appointments. And I got trolled on that. And somebody in there said, how on earth has someone like you managed to get the platform that you have? And I was like, oh, get lost. Like my confidence, like I know I deserve, but then my self-esteem was really knocked. And I started to criticise myself a lot, my tone, my voice, the way I looked. All that kind of came to play, and that really shook me. And it took a lot of work to build my self-esteem back up again. And obviously I got rid of the online scheduling tool to protect myself. But it's things like that could happen. So I know we kind of shared vague tips, I would say, throughout this discussion. Some tips. But any kind of tips you have, Trudy, let's go to you first, what people can do to build their self-esteem.
I mentioned it before. So a big part of that is self-talk, and watch your self-talk. Now, to your point, you're self-critical. You kind of go through this thing of telling yourself that you're rubbish. Watch your self-talk, but also watch how you overthink things in order to do that self-talk, and not really reframe, because it's not about reframing, but that thing of what is real and what is not real is always a very good question to ask yourself. So why is this happening? I might be saying that nobody will listen to me. What evidence do you have that nobody listens to you? And it's challenging the fact that you're telling yourself this stuff, but there's no evidence to prove that. So there's a real little tactic that you can do for yourself, is that whenever you find yourself in that position, is to get something to take your attention away and to actually ask yourself the question, is this real? Is this really what's happening, in light of the fact that there's either evidence or no evidence? Because, if there's evidence, then there's evidence. But then again, even that can be refuted if that evidence is warped because of your thinking. Because when we have low self-esteem, there's an element to which we've not quite got the right perspective on things. And sometimes we're looking at things from a very assumptive viewpoint. So we have to watch that, and we have to kind of challenge the thoughts that we have coming through. That's a really big one.
Well, it's a story that you're telling yourself.
Exactly. And it's kind of walking your way out of that story, because if the story says one thing, it's the little things that you can do for yourself that will take your attention away, change how you're thinking about something, distract you from actually going down this incredible rabbit hole and staying there forever. Another one is, I wrote some down. So there's one about visualization. So visualizing where you want to be and just taking a time. It's a bit meditate-y, kind of take some time out and sit down and have a little visualization and think about the thing as if to say it went well, or that part of you as if to say it went well, or think of yourself, your best self. So when were you that best self, and what were the things that helped you to be that best self? And those, that kind of a visualization is really powerful, really helpful to get you to start thinking about things a little bit differently.
Great tips.
Well, I don't think there was. This has been really reflective for me, as you can probably hear listening to the episode, in terms of, when you were saying about you being trolled and what happened and how that made you feel. It made me reflect at a certain similar point in time back in 2020, where I had someone that was being quite obnoxious, and how I did get knocked, quite severely there. So I'm having lots of reflection. It's a lovely therapy session for this episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the live therapy session. But I think the tips for me are definitely around what I said about kind of pruning your life to take the people out. And I think that's really important. There are people in my life who I've known for a very long time, who, when I wrote my book, went to other friends and were like, "Oh God, if you heard she's writing a book." And I was a bit like, be gone. And there was a lot of things that had happened. It wasn't just that one thing. I'm not that mean. there were other things that had happened.
You don't like my book?
Yes. Get out. Get in the bin. It was more, there were sort of other things that had happened where in sort of group environments, they would sort of pick on you a bit and over time you gradually just get older, I think, and just go, I don't need to put up with this. So I've sort of removed myself. So that's a big tip for me. I think look at the people in your life and make sure that you're surrounding yourself by people who are good critical friends. Not people that are just going to agree with you all the time, but people that are going to cheer you on, support you, and tell you if you need to, stop doing something.
Yeah.
So that's one. I think the not rewarding yourself is interesting. When you said that, I said, I'm not very good at that. And then I was reflecting on our coach, Chris Ducker, who always tells me how great I am at going to the spa and things. And that I heard him. But I'm not very good at acknowledging my achievements. So when I wrote the book and published that, and everyone was like, this is amazing. And I was like, yeah, I've just, written a book and just sort of quite blasé about it. And Advita, you and I have talked about that now. You've done yours. And this sort of slightly blasé nature you get about it, because I think you get so drawn into it and it's such a long process that you just, it becomes quite accepting. So I think there is something about celebrating and recognising that. And I also want to come back to what does it mean to you? So whether it's confidence or self-esteem, what does confidence mean to you? What is your worth? Like really understand that for yourself.
Yeah.
And it's not a tip, but something I wrote down when you started the podcast was, is imposter syndrome a helpful label that stops us from exploring things deeper? And I think that's something to just sit with. It's very easy to grab that label and go, oh, I've got imposter syndrome, which actually, what does that mean? And don't hide behind that. Let's explore whether it's confidence, whether it's self-esteem, whether it's self-pity, there's other elements in there, and let's delve into that and let's help fix that. And I think they're my bits, really.
No, really good. For me, I'm going to go a bit practical a little bit in terms of how you can, building on Jenni's and Trudy's tips around reframing. So what I always say to people who say to me, oh, I just can't do that. I just can't. I can't. Sorry, that's just that's a bit of an in-joke. But it's I always say yet. So the word, I can't do that yet. Or I'm not capable of doing that yet. And I think that's really important to use those words to say, no, I'm not ready yet, but I will be. In terms of apologising, because I think that it is very common. And I know there's lots of tips out there about, saying thank you rather than, thanks for spotting that error, rather than, oh, I'm so sorry. And that's something I'm very conscious of. And I would be very mindful about the number of times you apologise for something that isn't your fault, or isn't necessary. Like if I don't know, something's in the way, oh, I'm really sorry. Like I'll move that out of the way. You don't need to kind of say that. So what I would say, because it's such a regular pattern that you don't recognise you're doing that, is to track it and get an accountability buddy to spot that in you. So speak to a colleague or a friend or whoever and say, look, if I keep saying something, let me know, like nudge me or text me or whatever, then you're aware of it. Because once you become more aware of it, you can make the change happen. And the other thing I want to kind of, the final point is to Jenni's point, is you don't know what you don't know. So it's really important to sit down and really identify what it is that you're trying to do. So is it about wanting to have more impact? Is it about wanting to influence people? Is it about wanting to speak up? Is it that you want to be a podcaster or you want to speak on stage? Find out what it is, because then you can work towards it. But if you kind of just say a very broad, I want to be more confident, what does that even mean? Confident in what? Confident in more, I want to be a better cook. Confident that I want to run the London Marathon. Never going to happen, but
no, thank you.
No, thank you. But just pick up.
Trudy was very quiet then. I was like, crikey.
No.
But find what is it? What is it that you want to be more confident in? Do you want to be able to speak up more in front of your boss? What is it? And that's when you can get the true help and support as well. But yeah, those are our tips. God, that was filled.
I feel like I need a little cup of tea.
That was a bit deeper than I thought it was going to get.
Yeah, I definitely need a cup of tea.
I'm going to go make a cup.
Maybe a gin.
Thank you for listening. If you want to find out more or subscribe to our newsletter, visit calmedgerebels.com. We'd love to continue this conversation, so please connect, ask questions, and share your thinking with us. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn under Calm Edge Rebels. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to rate and review us.